Hi, welcome everybody to the Journey Back. Today we're going to be discussing polarities and what it's really the difference actually between living in a polarized reality and living in a multidimensional reality. So, we all know that there's all kinds of different views about reality. And so we're just going to start. So, Mary, you were just bringing up some things about, kind of the small view versus the big view. So can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. If we're all being very 3D, it's common in that experience to have like it's a this or a that, it's black or white. There may be a spectrum of or gray, but a lot of times we only have like one option before us. Like it is day right now or it is night. And so for me, what I like about kind of taking a different multidimensional perspective is that when you are in another realm or perspective that doesn't have time or space, for example, that allows you to have a different perspective of that so that you can see, if you're backing up from, I'm living in Maryland and it's daytime. And if I kind of have a different perspective, I can see that, it's night in other places of the world. And so I have both experiences at the same time.
I think too, it's like to me, that goes right down to choices too. I think because if we live in a 3D reality or a polarized reality, like you say, the choices are literally black and white too. It's like, it's not just that it's day or night, but it's in that reality, it's I can do this or I can do that. But there's not this fluidity of what can be created through multiple realities. It's like if you're looking at it from a different vantage point, then you can actually see that, well, yeah, it can be a shade of gray, but it can be kind of created out of all kinds of different awarenesses versus, I think a lot of times polarities are because we live polarities over and over again because we create from what's been programmed within us versus the creativity of us, which allows us to go, oh, it's not black or white. I can do this, I can do that. What about these options? Yeah.
Well, and the great artists for me always expand that boundary, what Picasso did was just revolutionary, not even considered, is that possible that you can have a woman with like this eye and then that lip and it just was a paradigm shift. So for me, that's a concrete example of how somebody is just going outside and looking and saying, no, I can have some realism and then also some fantasy and have them go together.
Yeah, and we kind of got the opportunity to do that when, you look at different topics that, that we've all been talking about for a while anyway. It's like when you focused on autism, for a really long time and that whole different perceptual reality and thus different choices that came with looking at children diagnosed with autism as awesomeism, and also the difference between looking at ourselves as simply human versus looking at ourselves as truly as multidimensional beings, as galactic citizens, as universal citizens, as part of all that is. Each one of those is a different facet and a different awareness. So, yeah. Karilyn, what do you want to add?
Well, there is so much polarity going on right now in the world, especially with all, none of this being in the subconscious anymore, that it's all coming up to the surface. So it gives everybody a really good look at what those polarities are. And it's like the polarities are going so far apart that the choice that's left is unity, because there's nothing you can only take it so far. You can only blame for so long, whether it's yourself or someone else. And so it brings in that step from duality or polarity into a creative process, like the Trinity balance.
Right. Yeah, because it can only get
really creative.
Yeah, because it can only get so far apart, right? Before it has to, a polarity can only get so far apart before it has to snap. It has to, or there's no reality in those, there's no shared reality in those two polarities. They get so separated, in whatever way they get separated. But you're right. It's like if you bring that information almost back to the center, if you bring it back you take those points and connect them, then, again, and more often than not, I mean, in my visual anyway, it's like that line of polarity is on the horizontal, right? But the line that connects them is somewhere up in the vertical. And so it's almost like you do have to go to a higher symmetry state to see where those two things, are, so just back to the autism thing, it's like, it's like you have to go pretty far to get a different view. Like if you're just seeing it from a linear perspective, it's pretty black and white, it's pretty painful. But when you go to a different view of that, it's like all of a sudden it's like, okay, now I can see where this is a gift, or I can see where, but you can't see that from that, that kind of 2D really kind of line, just that polarity. We need that third point in there to, and like I say, it's usually a higher dimensional point, different.
Well, I like to, even in the 3D expression, this was listed somewhere, all the genders that can project. If you're checking something for gender,
Yeah.
It's be male, female.
Yeah.
Male, female, undecided or unchosen.
Yeah.
Now there's a whole long list.
I know, isn't it cool?
There's no definition, but I like it because it's a tangible thing that people can see, that's kind of a stepping stone to that larger picture.
Yeah, it's a perfect example. Yeah, no shades of gray. I mean, it is shades of gray there. It's like there's not an either or anymore. It's like, yeah.
Well, and I love too, you talk about those 2 points and something higher, we're always informing, this point is informing that point. And so when you can take that view, you learn, and each side is transformed, like for me, to have this whole gender fluidity, it makes me, understand those aspects of me that are very masculine, and I can embrace those differently without feeling like my femininity is challenged. There's more space for me to understand myself in a whole way around gender.
Right. Yeah, makes perfect sense. And I just think about the number of choices that it does open up to. I talk about creativity and fluidity, and I'm not just talking about gender choices, but any place where we have been programmed to think that it's this or that. It's like, 20, 30 years ago it used to be, it's like you either were married or you're not married, but there were no configurations in between, right? And not a whole lot of joy either. So it's like, I just love the fact that this is, I just love the fact that there is more fluidity to all of this than there ever has been before, and that we are seeing shades of gray, and that those shades of gray are actually making us happier instead of more creative too.
More expensive.
More choices.
Yeah, you think about, I think too, it's like, what the status quo used to be. It's like the choices were so narrow, and so even the opportunity and the choice to be having this conversation today, and to be doing it from our homes, and to this be our workplaces, and this being our, where we kind of nurture and our kids and our families and all that other kind of stuff. It just, to me, it feels like it's, it's like the more we expand beyond what we thought our limitations were, we actually end up happier. It's like, does that make sense?
Sure.
Well, it certainly allows, if we are all aspects of source, and source is all that is, it just allows that to be expressed instead of, okay, so I can only be all that is this way as a married woman Exactly.
Yeah, and you think about that, like, say, 1950s, we're not talking that long ago. And it's like how narrow that passageway was. And then, you look at, I mean, it's crazy. You can see consciousness shifting right from that point, that reference point, to the current reference point.
I can also see where, because again, we're talking about like a very free, expressive place. And I can see almost why the backlash to this authoritarianism and this nationalism, it's to some people, it's frightening not to be told who to be. You have a very narrow identity. You know what's expected. There's a lot of, there can be safety to some people in being really told and being narrowly defined.
Right.
Yeah, and having that polarity of it's this, not that.
Yes.
Rather than it being both, and you having the responsibility and the joy to make that choice.
Well, and another element of that too is, when people like that particular, not having that choice in some ways, I think a lot of times it also sends them into a different kind of polarity, which is usually an inferior or superior polarity. And so I think a lot of times what ends up happening is we want to be told so that we know we're doing it, quote unquote, right.
Yes.
And the funny thing is that, it's like who decides right, and how that limits the potentials and possibility of humanity. And you think about it, that it's never the people within the human condition who stick to that polarity that really stand out and make a huge difference in the world, or really inspire us to something greater. It's always those people that kind of do something a little bit rogue, a little bit different than what has been programmed. And, there's so many potentials and possibilities. Think about my own life experience. And, if somebody had told me back when I was very focused in a polarized thought process, that I'd have some of the freedoms to move into different realms and to experience in different ways that I do now, it's like you wouldn't have believed them, because it's like you've got the blinders on, right? But one after another, as those blinders come off, it's like, okay, it gets that much bigger and that much bigger. What else can be created? What else can be reconfigured to be enjoyable versus to be a limitation? So.
Yeah, and I think for me, that's what's driving it too. It's not just, there's the joy, the grace, and the ease, and there's love. It's, for me, it ultimately feels more loving to see and know someone as an authentic expression of themselves, and to feel a connection there. That I think we are moving toward greater and greater love, which gets us to this wholeness, again, which kind of is that triangular point between the polarity, is that it's all good, it's all good.
Well, we talked about this not too long ago at a live event that we had, where we were talking about loving beyond what you've been able to love before. And so from that polarized point of view, it's like, a parent looks at a child, and the child, if the polarization says the child's supposed to be this way or that way, then anything that the child's not, or the spouse is supposed to be this way or the other, or the significant other, whatever you want to call it, that our lives are supposed to be this way or this way. It's like the moment we that's where we get into discomfort, right? That's where we get into stress and pain and anxiety and suffering. And it's almost like every single time we open up to something beyond that, we love beyond what we thought we were able to love, we love beyond what we could love before, we realize that it actually grows us. The love actually grows us. It gives us other opportunities. I think that's an important piece in human history right now, that, to keep our focus on, that we are absolutely growing beyond what we've been able to love before. And we get plenty of opportunities every day to do just that.
Yeah, and it's that willingness to either sit in the discomfort of it, or just notice it without going into feeling inferior because of it.
Yeah.
Just recognizing, wow, this is an opportunity
Yeah.
to expand and to love more and to experience. That is huge.
Yeah.
And it's a real challenge if you're resisting that, if not wanting to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, they tell me this is going to feel good, but no.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
I'm just gonna hunker down in my
I'm just
position.
gonna
I'm gonna
pull
hold
back
this
here.
right, damn it.
Until it gets too uncomfortable to do that.
Right.
And it feels like now that's coming a whole lot faster.
Yeah, it
than it
comes
has
with,
before.
yeah, that breaking point hits, right? And it's like, and we think that, we think the breaking point is a distortion, you know, or that it's something that's a negative. What do you have, a B or a
I have a
B?
B.
Oh. You're the queen bee.
We love somewhere else.
So I just think that, you know, it's that point where it gets so, I think of times in my own life where it got so painful, you know, it's like that you thought, you know, where you think there's only certain choices, there's only certain choices to be made, and it gets so painful that it's almost like that polarity kind of snaps, like I said, and then the whole thing gets reconfigured. But the interesting part is when it gets reconfigured, it gets reconfigured to something so much bigger, you know, than it had been before. Yeah, so and I think we're all collectively, we're kind of getting to our snapping points, and we perceive that as negative, but it's not negative. I mean, not from my vantage point anyway. It's like something has to get dismantled, something has to snap in order to be reconfigured in a more positive. But most people, like you were saying, Karilyn, most people don't like to sit in that space, right, long enough to have it reconfigured to something else. So, yeah.
Well, you know, it reminds me, there's an exercise trend in Asia that you're attached to bungee cords, you know, from the ceiling.
Yeah.
And it kind of changes that snap feeling, because you can exercise and you have resistance, which helps the exercise, but you can jump.
Yes.
You can do things so smoothly.
Yeah.
It's almost like it gives the body and the mind a different, it activates a different memory that things don't have to snap.
Exactly.
They can, but it's like, okay, this can be different. It can be flowing, it can be fun,
yeah,
and still be different, and get and integrate, almost like integrating the polarity of being in the body and out of the body. It's like,
so then the polarity becomes choice, right? So then the polarity is just like, it's like Esther Hicks talks about, it's contrast, right? You know, and so it's like, okay, I've got this contrast, and that doesn't feel so good, but it doesn't have to be suffering and snapping before that, right? It just is simply, I see the contrast, I choose this side of that, or I choose that side, you know, combinations thereof. So yeah, it's really fun to look at it that way. So anything else about polarities before we call it a day today? No?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I think we could talk on this subject for a really long time. There's all kinds of fun stuff. So until next time, thanks for joining us for the journey back, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Bye.